All right, I think we are live. Okay. Actually, are we live? I think we're live. Happy Sunday, everyone. Let me just double check. Okay, I think we're live. Okay, good. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me in the session. Happy Sunday. I hope everyone is safe, happy, and healthy wherever you are in the world today. And as always, I am honored to be with you here every week, and this week is no exception. In this time of sensitivity and uncertainty, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. So the things we're going to do in our sacred space time together today is just like past weeks. Number one, I'll go ahead and set sacred space. Number two, we'll talk about our overall topic for the week. And our topic for this week will be the gifts of wounding. The gifts of wounding. And I'll say more about that in just a second. We'll have a bit of an exercise at the end of the conversation. And then we'll go ahead and close sacred space. So I'll go ahead and start opening sacred space now. So as we set sacred space, what we would like to do is we would like to make a space together here now, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. In order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that. It could be a higher muse that guides us. It could be just random, brilliant flashes of insight that come to you. Like when you're soaking in the bath or going for a long run, you just, driving, you have these wonderful insights that come to you, like when you're in the shower. So creating a space like that for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves. A safe sanctuary space for us all to be able to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake together of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every week, that we all follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. The first is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule for when we're in person, but when we're online, the stream is public, the replay will be public. The way we handle confidentiality is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to, the way you would do that is to come into the Crowdcast stream, go to your edit profile, change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever you'd like, and then come back and continue chatting, continue asking questions, whatever you'd like to do. And you don't have to participate at all. So that's the first principle. The second is that we ask each other and ourselves to refrain from any kind of behavior that is well, we would like to have our presence here be devoid of threat, controlling of ourselves or each other. So there's no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. So even if it's well-intentioned, well, I'm just doing this for your own good. We don't do that here, not because it's wrong or bad, but because even when I'm well-intentioned, right, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Right, that finger wagging, it is of the provenance of fear, threat, and control, even if it's good for you. And now there's nothing wrong with that. Because it's fear, threat, and control, it categorically is not the space we're creating here. It's out in the profane world of fear, threat, and control. Punishment, intervention, fixing, tough love, curing. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. No one's saying profane is bad. Profane is just profane. But there are certain things that you can only get done, certain kinds of nourishment that are only available to us when we are in sacred space together as a group. It's like certain flavors you can only taste when you're not having this like cacophony of, fast food or sort of artificial flavors. Only certain sounds you can hear when you quiet down. Right, so there are certain kinds of nourishment that you can only get when you're in sacred space, and that's kind of what we're here to do. There's really nothing else more pressing that like binds us together as we come back here every week. So here, what we try to do is we try to hold space for each other, to be however we are, and then to hold space for each other to feel however we feel about how we are. Right, so I hold space for you, and hopefully it's mutual, to be afraid, to be anxious, or to be happy and relaxed. And then however you feel about that, you could be like, I'm afraid, and well, of course I'm afraid. You'd be a fool to not be afraid. Or you could be afraid and feel like, no, I feel incompetent and weak that I'm afraid, right? Or I could feel happy and feel guilty that I'm happy. Or I could feel happy and feel okay that I'm happy. However you are and however you feel about that, we hold space for you and for each other to be however you are. The third principle is a corollary to the above, which is no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold in sacred space. I can't sell you anything. Gowrie can't sell you anything. Please don't sell things to each other in the chat. And that includes recommendations as well. So even if, so when I sell you something, right, basically I'm like, here's this shiny thing. It will solve your headache. And the implied threat is if you don't buy my thing, your headache will continue. That's a threat. That's a threat. All great marketing is threat, right? Well-meaning threat, couched in sort of pretty pictures and pretty words, but basically threat. That's what gets you to move. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But in sacred space, because we are leaving behind fear, threat, and control, we ask that we refrain from commerce, right? Because it is an implied threat. And we also ask that we refrain from recommendations, right? So even if I recommend, this book or this sort of a resource for you, that's fantastic, and it's free, or you pay for it, but I'm not making any money off of it. We ask that you refrain from that too, because it doesn't matter whether you are benefiting from it. It's the threat that's placed on the table that kind of degrades the quality of the sacred space we're in. Said another way, we are here for your energy, however it is, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for your value add. We're here for your essence, not for what you do or provide, right? And then the fourth principle is there's no expectation of participation, right? So in keeping, as a corollary to everything we've just said, there's no pressure to do anything, right? So you can chat or not chat, you can ask questions, not ask questions. You can come to sacred space and stay. You can leave, come and go as you please. You can listen half-heartedly while you're driving or making lunch or dinner. And there's also no fear, threat, or control for you to come into sacred space, right? So you don't need to like arm twist your friends and say, oh, this is really good. This is good for you. You got to get in here. Or maybe in profane space you do that, but once they're in, you let them, take it or leave it. So there's no expectation of participation because, again, the nourishment we all partake of comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are and not from what you do or provide. That's the nature of sacred space in a nutshell, and all of us together, when we come together in group sacred space, holding this common sacred space will tend to amplify that effect. So that's why these sessions are so nourishing for me, certainly, because it's like a feast. It's like a potluck. And when I participate with you, even though I'm kind of, the facilitator, right, I get to partake of that nourishment as well. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with that, that's totally okay. We're not going to fear, threat, and control you to stay. But that is where we're going. We're about to cross the threshold into sacred space. So I want to pause now and give everyone a moment to make your own selection as to whether you would like to stay or go. And if you withdraw, that's totally cool. We'll catch up with you later in profane space and still hang out. No worries. Okay. So I'll give you a moment to dial that in. Okay. And now, so for the rest of us, we will now move forward together into sacred space. And as we cross the threshold together into sacred space, I will just remind you that we are now in observance of the 4 principles of sacred space: confidentiality/anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no fixing, no interventions, no self-love, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right. Welcome back to Sacred Space, everyone. Happy to have you all here. One of the best parts of my week. And now let's move into our talk. So our topic this week will be the gifts of wounding. The gifts of wounding. And let me just make sure we're still live here. Okay, seems to be all right. So in the gifts of wounding, the question is, what are the fruits and the gifts that come out of our deepest wounds? Right. This week's myth brainstorm conversation I had with Gary, my editor in Bangalore, brought us to a reflection of the gifts and superpowers that come out of our deepest wounds, which will then often translate into, the blessings from us that rain down on the life of the world around us. And for this discussion, we will start with another mythic figure from the Greek tradition, and we'll just let the golden thread lead us from there. So Gary, if you're there, I'd love for you to come back up on screen. Hi.
Hi, Artie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome back. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And do you want to tell us about the story you've selected for this week?
Yeah, I mean, when we did Hephaestus, right? It was basically something that you had mentioned, I think a few months back. And in a flash of insight over something, I thought, okay, why aren't we doing Hephaestus? Because I knew you had a lot to say about Hephaestus. So Chiron was something similar, just like Hephaestus. Chiron is something that hold very dear to you, and that kind of kept coming up in our discussions. We kept bringing Chiron in kind of metaphors, and so I thought, yeah, I think Chiron then needs his own space as well for a week.
Absolutely, it's brilliant. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
So would you want me to give the story? The thing about Chiron is that there is no single epic story entirely dedicated to him. What we know about Chiron is bits and pieces of anecdotes and different poems and epics. Like there's some mention of him in the Iliad and some in the Odyssey, some Ovid, and so there's a lot of people, just Apollonius who wrote Jason and the Argonauts. So everyone mentions a little bit of him, and there are heroes who kind of bring him in as a reference when they want to say something. So that's what we know about him in bits and pieces. So what I'm really going to do is pull all those bits and pieces together and start from the birth of Chiron till his death and see how his life traces. So that's
I love that.
What I'm trying to do. Yeah.
I love that. I can't wait.
Yeah. All right.
Please start wherever you would like to and tell us the story again.
Right. So Chiron, like I said, is a figure that keeps appearing in a lot of Greek poetry and epics. And so Chiron was a centaur. He was the oldest and the wisest centaur. So he gets mentioned in a lot of these poems, and people refer to him as wise Chiron, wise-hearted Chiron. And that's, however, not the general impression of centaurs. Or centaurs were this tribe of half horse, half men, who were wild and savage and sort of lustful, and prone to drunken revelry, and pretty savage in the way they conducted themselves. They were definitely not very friendly to humans. So that's the general impression of centaurs. But then there was Chiron, who was the king of centaurs, the leader of centaurs, but he was really compassionate and wise. And how did that come to be is what we learn when we go through his story. So Chiron, unlike the other centaurs, this tribe of centaurs were all children, offspring of the cloud nymph called Nephele and her husband, who was a human king called Ixion. So their offspring turned out to be this half horse, half men, and the overall centaurs. But before that, Chiron was born to a sea nymph and Cronus. So here we're talking about Cronus, who was pre-Zeus, right? So Cronus was a Titan. So this is before the order of deities on Mount Olympus. So we're talking about Cronus when he coupled with this sea nymph called Philyra. And Cronus's wife was Rhea, right? So when he saw Philyra, the sea nymph, he fell in love with her. And in the act of him mating with Philyra, his wife Rhea happened to kind of chance upon them. And she didn't know this, but Cronus immediately, because he wanted to escape her notice, turned himself into a horse, right? And it was in this way that the baby was conceived. So when the baby was born, much to Philyra's disgust and horror, this baby was half horse and half human. And we're talking about a time when this tribe of centaurs didn't even exist, right? So this was the first centaur to be born. So there was nothing that prepared Philyra for the kind of baby that was born, right? So she was horrified and she abandoned the baby. And Cronus himself wanted nothing to do with it, right? So the baby was abandoned. And Apollo, the sun god, right, took pity on the baby. He took him to Mount Pelion and raised him there. So Chiron grew up, as good as Apollo's son. And because Apollo was the god of, music, healing, poetry, and fortune-telling, astrology, Chiron, while growing up, learned all of these arts, and he turned out to be exceptionally brilliant at all of them. And he was so good that once he'd grown up and had become an expert in all of these things, human kings and gods themselves sent their children to Chiron to teach them all these arts. So that's how Chiron came to be a teacher, like a mentor, right? And this is significant because he's one of the oldest centaurs and one of the oldest deities, one of the oldest immortals in Greek pantheon. He also became a mentor for a lot of gods and heroes that we study in Greek myths. That all of the heroes we know can trace their mentoring back to Chiron. We spoke about Jason last week, and Jason was raised by Chiron, and he was taught in warfare and all of the fighting arts by Chiron himself. And then we have Achilles. We have Asclepius, who himself was the god of healing, right? So we have all of these gods and heroes who were mentored by Chiron. So that's his legacy, right? We also have the example of Dionysus. Apparently, Chiron loved Dionysus, and he taught him chanting and dancing. And we spoke about Dionysus, I think, a week or two ago, when we were talking about religious ecstasy, right? The god of religious ecstasy. And he was taught chanting and dancing into all of these sort of rites and initiations by Chiron himself. So that's the kind of legacy we're talking about. So what I want to do is very briefly talk about his mentoring of Asclepius and also his mentoring of Achilles. I think these are two key things that stand out from all of the others. And we start with Asclepius, right? Asclepius was, much like Chiron. He was sort of almost dead because his mother Coronis died when he was still in the womb. And she was lying dead on her funeral pyre. And Apollo, who was his father, pretty much snatched him out of the womb and out of the flames that were burning her body. And instantly, this newborn, he took him to Chiron's cave. And he handed over his child to Chiron to raise him. And Chiron felt honored that, his own father Apollo, right, his foster father Apollo, gave him the charge, this honorable charge of raising his own child. So he was delighted. And he taught him all of these skills and arts that he knew himself, but principally healing. He taught him about herbs, he taught him about potions and how to heal, how to cure. And Asclepius then went on to become this god of healing himself, right? And it's also interesting that Asclepius then trained Hippocrates in healing and curing. And it's Hippocrates that all of the medical community today kind of honors, possibly we could say as their ancestor, right? So that's an amazing kind of legacy that we can trace back to Chiron. And the other thing that I want to mention is Chiron as a mentor of Achilles. Now, Achilles, as we know from the Iliad, from the Odyssey, that is probably the Greek pantheon's one of the greatest heroes. And he was the son of Peleus and Thetis. And it turns out that Chiron had something to do with even Peleus and Thetis getting married. Because when Peleus fell in love with Thetis, he was the one who advised him on how to woo her. And he arranged for their wedding. Right. So he was almost like a mentor to Peleus himself. But when Achilles was born, he was this baby. And Peleus had to join Jason in his, quest for the golden fleece that we discussed last week. So Peleus got onto the Argo, the ship, and Achilles was a child. So Thetis had brought him, to the ship to just wave goodbye to Peleus. And there's this very touching scene where, Peleus holds his baby for the last time before he leaves. And he looks up to the gods and says, "Oh gods, please keep my boy safe. I just ask you that one thing, keep my boy safe. And for everything else, I've got Chiron to vouchsafe for." And that's just so touching. So he goes to Chiron, tells him, "Teach my boy, in all the arts that in all the skills of warfare, but teach him to hold my staff, my spear, and make him into a man." So he kind of gives the charge of his son to Chiron, and that's the kind of trust he has, and then leaves for the voyage, right? So that's how Achilles, baby Achilles, grew up with Chiron. And this baby was extraordinary himself, right? As a small boy, he would fight lions and rip them apart. So that's the kind of boy he was. But it was Chiron's mentoring and training that turned him into this powerful warrior, this force of nature, turned into this powerful warrior. So that's Chiron, right? And Chiron, and there's no surprise when we're talking at this kind of scale and this kind of level. The Chiron was also the mentor of Heracles. Again, another very powerful hero from the Greek tradition. And one of the most fascinating things about Heracles and Chiron is that Chiron trained him, and Heracles had all the affection for Chiron, right? And Chiron's death comes about through Heracles, although albeit accidentally, right? Heracles was on the way to visit Chiron's cave on Mount Pelion, and he kind of walked into this bunch of centaurs who were drunk, and they were kind of partying in a wild way that centaurs do. And Heracles and the centaurs got into a skirmish, and Heracles took one of his arrows and he pulled it on to the centaurs. So this particular arrow that he shot was dipped in the blood of the Hydra, which was a water serpent that he had slayed. And this water serpent the blood was just deadly poison, right? So this arrow was dipped in Hydra's blood, and he shot this arrow. And Chiron at that time came out of the cave to see what the noise was about, and he came in the way to stop the fight, and he accidentally got shot by the arrow himself in his leg. Now, the poison was so strong that it made the wound incurable, even for Chiron, even with his skill in healing. And then he was doomed to this eternal agony and pain and suffering from that wound. And he tried to kind of heal himself, cure himself in many, many ways. And even in some traditions that even Artie mentioned to me, it's believed that Chiron, with all the healing knowledge that he knew, that he had, became even more of an expert and a master because of all the new inventions and the new discoveries he made, because he was trying to cure this wound that he had. So he went on to master the art of healing even more. But nothing he tried worked. And he was condemned to this suffering in pain because of this wound. And he couldn't die. And this is the thing, because he's immortal, he's a deity, he couldn't die either. And that made it all the more unbearable, right? So he just had to suffer for eternity. And the interesting thing is that while we come back to Heracles was distraught by this, right? He was completely distressed that an accident like this hurt his own mentor. And in one of his, now Heracles is famous for his 12 labors, right? There's impossible tasks that he performed. And in one of the labors, which was, I think, the 11th labor, when he went looking for the 3 golden apples, he happened to come upon the mountains of Caucasus, where Prometheus, the deity who Zeus was angry with, had been tied and was being tortured. Now, the story of Prometheus is that he was the deity who first stole fire from the gods and gave it to humankind. And he was punished for it because that was not supposed to happen. The humans were not supposed to have the gift of fire. And because Prometheus did that, Zeus chained him for eternity to the Caucasus Mountains, and he sent this eagle to rip his liver out every single day. And because he was immortal, the liver would just grow back every night. And the next day, the eagle would just peck at it again and rip the liver out. So this was just eternal torture that Prometheus was doomed to because he defied the gods, right? And Heracles, when he came upon Prometheus, was overcome by pity and compassion for Prometheus' suffering. And he went to Zeus to ask for his freedom and how he could free Prometheus from this eternal torture. And he learned that Prometheus could only be free if his life was exchanged, was traded in with the life of another immortal. Now, who would do that, right? Who would give up their immortality just to give Prometheus his freedom? But then there was Chiron, who was already suffering with this wound, and he was in pain. And he agreed, he volunteered to Zeus, and he volunteered to give up his immortality in exchange for Prometheus' freedom. And Zeus agreed, because that was the condition he had set when he had tied up Prometheus. And here was someone who voluntarily walked up and said, I'm willing to give up my immortality. So there was no way he could refuse. So he agreed to free Prometheus. But Zeus himself was so moved by this gesture that he placed Chiron among the stars after his death. And that's where he is until today. And we know him by the constellation Sagittarius or Centaurus. So that's Chiron, right? So that's the story of the wisest.
Hi. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I love hearing about Chiron. I could just listen all day. Okay, so before I kind of get into the notes I've prepared, let me ask my usual question, which is, in all of that story, where do you enter into the story of Chiron?
There are so many things that are fantastic about it, right? So the thing that over and over, kind of a pattern that I saw and that moved me was how much everyone who knew Chiron kind of trusted him. To trust your friend, the one you know, with your own child is a huge deal, right? It's a huge deal. Just to hand over your child and say, he's in your care, do your magic, and I know that my child will turn out fine. To say that is a huge deal, and it is so amazing to me that right from Apollo himself, who raised Chiron, down to Peleus, everyone just instantly trusts Chiron, that he knows what's best for my son. So that, I think, and it's kind of funny that the word mentor, and you mentioned this, right? The word mentor comes from the character mentor in the Odysseus. I mean, we go late into Greek mythology to find the word for it, and here was Chiron, who was like the epitome of this elder / teacher and mentor to young boys, and he them into men. He initiated them into manhood. And he was this primary character and example of it. So that's what's really amazing to me.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. Yeah, so it's interesting that Chiron came up for you and for us for this session, because as we know, this session is actually the 52nd session of weekly live sacred space. So today marks the completion of a year of sessions. The actual anniversary, I think, is March 25th, which is about a week away. But again, for the 52nd week, both of us felt called to tell the story of Chiron. And for me, it's personally to really take this opportunity, mark, the year of sessions we've done during this pandemic, kind of yearly. I mean, at this point, right, on the vigil, this year mark is not a kind of goal we were driving towards, certainly, but as these things go, here we are, right? And really to sort of, in everything we've gone through over the past year, the elements of healing, the elements of initiation through transformation, that Chiron is kind of this ultimate initiator, right? And mentor and teacher. As you go through painful, terrifying transformation, the element of healing, the element of not just curing of disease, but healing in the sense of reconciling principles within yourself that may be in conflict. So it just seemed really fitting to give honor to Chiron on this 52nd week as a mentor and as an archetype. For me personally, Chiron is a figure that for a very long time has been near and dear to my heart. My own, one of my own sort of patron gods is the one you mentioned, Asclepius, right, the healer. And Chiron, of course, was his parent and mentor and teacher. So Chiron is like the grandfather of healers, if you will, which then makes Apollo Chiron's sort of foster father, the great-grandfather of healers, even though Apollo is the eternally youthful god, right? Which, I mean, it tells you something about that power of healing, right, and where it comes from. So anyway, I think it's very moving for me, and I think for us to dedicate this 52nd session, completion of a year, to the honoring of Chiron. And some then more things to say about Chiron here. Should I go into do you have anything to say? Should I go into the notes?
Share your notes and thoughts, and then I'll
okay, and then okay.
Right.
So Chiron as an archetype. First thing to note is that this archetype is one of actually a double wound, right? The first wound is the wound of abandonment, where his mother and father don't want him, right? Neither of them want him. So he suffers that grief exactly like Hephaestus, right? This motif from a couple weeks ago, where we covered Hephaestus, this motif of being rejected and this loss of love right off the starting blocks, where you haven't even done anything, right? You just show up and you're thrown off Mount Olympus. So from the pattern of Hephaestus alone, I mean, it's not the only one. There's Chiron, there's Asclepius, there's all these others where they were orphaned basically at birth or rejected at birth. But given the pattern of even Hephaestus, you know that right at the beginning, we know this guy is going to do something interesting. Because right at the beginning, he suffers this wound. He is rejected and therefore soaked in grief. Soaked in grief. And this is the fascinating factor here around the physics of healing. Apollo, the god of healing, selects Chiron specifically, right? Just as he later selects Asclepius, who is also orphaned at birth, orphaned even before he was born, right? Because his mother died with him in utero. Apollo, the god of healing, selects these kinds of characters to be healers. He trains, he's training healers, but then he selects the raw material for the ones who will be healers. And the common sort of characteristic of all the healers he selects is that right from the beginning, they are soaked in grief. Chiron, Asclepius, others are soaked in grief. Said another way, there is a deep familiarity and comfort with the life force of grief, right, which is a valid life force. Grief is like sex, money, sort of charm, physical power, intelligence, intuition. Grief is right up there in the pantheon of valid life forces that, you can't live without them. But even if you could eliminate them from your life, you would no longer be human. Right? A human that has no grief that touches them is not fully human. So there's a deep familiarity and comfort with grief that you have to have in order to be that level of a healer. Because, how can you help someone heal if you are unfamiliar with grief? Right? You can be a fabulous cure. I can be a surgeon and come in and do the technical thing. So you can be a fabulous technician of curing and yet not be familiar, seasoned, marinated in grief. Curing is not the same as healing, as we've said again and again. Right? We've seen this interplay between healing and curing in so many different world traditions. It is telling that Asclepius trained Hippocrates, who was more of the curing tradition. And our Western medical traditions today honor Hippocrates, not Asclepius. Asclepius, where you see the staff, the ambulance figure with the staff with the single snake, not the double snake, that's a whole other story. The single snake going on, that is the rod of Asclepius. And maybe we'll do a session on Asclepius at some point. Hippocrates was a curer, right? Who looked to physical evidence, basically science, right, to control the symptoms of what his patients came to him for. Asclepian healing looked more to dreams for healing, right? So when you went to a temple of Asclepius, basically an ancient form of hospital, and I think at the height of it, Asclepian healing was the main mode of healing throughout the Mediterranean. I think it was, I'll just give the dates, probably the 1,000 years between about 500 BC to 500 AD. There were probably 1,000 temples of Asclepius across the Mediterranean. And I think the last one was destroyed, I think by the Christian bishop of Athens in 500 or so AD. Because, in the Christian system, Christ is the Asclepius, so we need to wipe out the original Asclepius. So anyway, the temple of Asclepius is where you would go. They would give you your spa robe and slippers, you would give your offering, and then they would stick you in a room where you would lie on the floor and sleep every night. And the goal of sleeping was to receive a dream from the healing god Asclepius. And then when you woke up, you would tell the dream. Sometimes the dream is just self-obvious, but when you woke up, you would tell the dream to one of the priests, and then they would do the interpretation and figure out what was the matter with you. They treated the dream as like an MRI, right? And they would read the dream for you and give you guidance based on the dream, exactly the way we do in our own healing, like we do in live group advising every week. So we can talk about Asclepius more later. So with this vocabulary then, I consider myself a healer in the Asclepian tradition. All right, so when I say my stuff is not a substitute for medical treatment, it's not therapy, it's just general advising, I'm saying that as a disclaimer, but also I'm saying it, with not a little pride. All right, with quite a bit of pride. Right, because my approach is not to, if you come to me with anxiety, my goal is not to make your anxiety go away. Right, my goal is to help you read your anxiety as a sign, as a breadcrumb to help lead you on your path forward. And if your anxiety goes away in the process because you got the message, so they can stop hitting the send button on the email, I mean that's fabulous. I'm happy for you, but that's not why we do it, right? And therefore, if your anxiety comes back later, that's fine. We're familiar with this. We know what it means from our past interactions, and then we can read it even faster. We have familiarity with it. Anxiety, grief is very similar, right? Even things that happen in your body, a rash that keeps coming back, right? These are all, we read them as mythopoetic signs and messages. And on a parallel track, you still go to the hospital, get it treated, take some whatever and make the rash go away. That's fine. But that's a separate track. That's a separate track. So with Chiron, there is this dynamic of orphaning, rejection, abandonment. right? And more specifically, is the reason why Chiron is orphaned and rejected and abandoned, right? So Hephaestus' shame was his crippled foot, this inner masculine that cannot stand on his own and cannot move forward. Priapus, right? Another sort of deity, sort of child of Aphrodite. His curse, the reason he was rejected at birth, was because he had this disfigured phallus, right? This member that was like, so if it was me, the sort of phallus would be like the size of like, 2 baseball bats or something, right? It's just like outrageous. It's comical. It's horrifying. It's not usable. It's way too big, right? And then there's a whole mythic story around Priapus and sort of what that means and what that happens. So why the child, why the emerging element is being rejected is significant here. And Chiron's reason for his rejection, the thing that brings him shame and grief, is that he is half human, half horse, half equine. But we know from dream work, right, that the horse is a symbol for the body, for the animal side of you, right? So it's basically, when you see a horse in a dream, it's a symbol for the part of you that is from your neck down, your body, your physicality, your sensuality, your sexuality, your physical power, your physical presence, your physical capability, your instinct, your intuition, right? As opposed to your intellect, your abstract conceptualization powers, your spirituality, right? Spirit is up, soul is down. And basically, if you're too spiritual, you're trying to avoid all the things where, you're trying to run away from feelings that are uncomfortable, feelings are in your body, and you're trying to run away from, feelings, sensations, actual pain, actual grief, and trying to intellectualize your way around it. Okay. But the horse, so a horse is a symbol for your body side, your animal side, which is kind of this secret, not so secret code or reminder that humans are animals too. Right? We can say, oh, we're humans, we're conscious, we're superior, but you're still built on an animal chassis, right? When you are, looking at the insides of a pig, the sort of organs look very similar to human organs, right? The setup is similar, the pancreas, the lungs, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we get too intellectual, too spiritual, we become disembodied, right? In other words, we attempt to divorce ourselves from the horse part of ourselves. And this is exactly what leads to arguably 80% of our problems, right? As a sort of collective of humankind. To be animalistic, not necessarily savage or primitive, to be animalistic is not intrinsically bad. It is okay. It is who we are, right? So when I look at a centaur, it's not disfigurement. It's not disgusting or repulsive, but it is rather a profoundly clear statement of truth that we as humans are half brain/intellect and half body/animal. The centaur is a reflection of who you really are. You are a centaur. I am a centaur. I am half sort of intellect, half body. Right? And I can do all these intellectual pursuits philosophically, conceptually, but I still need to eat at the end of the day. I still need to sleep. Right? In the sort of modern, mainly this modern sort of trend of body hacking, biohacking, right? Of course, is done all by guys, guys, right? Men who are like tech people who are already kind of in the ether, disembodied, and further trying to whip their inner horses, their bodies into shape to predict, to control, to cure, right? Body hacking so that they can sleep less and they can live without sleep and get more productivity out of themselves. And they can not have to eat all the time. They can just drink this like smoothie and be done with it and keep working. And it makes you wonder, like, why would you want to not eat and not sleep? And it's like, are those not pleasurable for you? Like, I love to eat and sleep. So the exiling of Chiron is rich. It is replete with mythopoetic insight to me, because When you exile a Chiron, it's like you're saying this half man, half body truth mic drop in your face. It's just too much. I can't handle the truth that I'm actually half animal, and I need to deny it, and I need to stuff it down. Okay. That's what you do when you exile your inner Chiron, your inner centaur. And of course, very tellingly, this is the element that you need to bring back in order to, again, in the male patriarchal tradition, it's Chiron initiates the men because the women have their own initiation sort of process. Actually, Demeter and Persephone is sort of that character. And of course, as humans, we have both, right? We have inner masculine and inner feminine. So Chiron initiating the men and the sort of feminine initiation is relevant to every single one of us, regardless of our external gender, because we have both within us. Okay. This principle of recognizing, and not just recognizing and accepting, but submitting yourself to the mentorship and wisdom and guidance of your true nature of being half animal and half all of these things, right? Where you're not just sacred, you're not just profane, you're sacred, right? You are half and half at least, and then you tune the balance as you go. All of the great heroes, right? Not just regular schlubs on the street, but the great heroes that we all look to as the ideal are themselves initiated, trained, mentored by Chiron. And so, and I mean, you're lucky if you get mentored by Chiron, right? And then, of course, now Chiron is banished. He's exiled. He's rejected for being like horrifically ugly, which really is, he's just reflecting who we really are. We can't handle that. And then, of course, what happens? The brilliant golden Apollo comes and says, oh, look at this. What is this I found abandoned in a dumpster, right? This like emblem of truth and reflection of who we really are, soaked in grief. This is excellent raw material for a healer, right? Just the kind of stuff that I can use as a catalyst for the bringing of reconciliation of truth within us, right? Not curing, but healing. So Chiron as an exile is obviously like, the mother or the grandfather of all exiles, right? Where he is able to acquire, because we say in the past, that when a part of you is exiled in these fairy tales, while they are in exile, they acquire superpowers and gifts, right? So Hephaestus acquired his metallurgical skills when he was in exile. In all the fairy tales, you go in exile and you learn music, you learn all these things before you come back. So because Chiron is like the mother of all exiles, the granddaddy of all exiles, when he is in exile, right, he is in exile with Apollo, right? Mess with me, right? I mean, this is the OG exile. And he acquires from beloved Apollo, glorious Apollo, all of these superpowers, some measure of prophecy, archery, healing, warcraft, right? He is the one that trains Achilles in fighting. So Chiron could be like the king of the warriors if he wanted, but it's telling that he doesn't do that. He is the ultimate mentor figure as well. Healing and mentoring go hand in hand, right? Literally, the word mentor comes from the character mentor in the Odyssey, who himself is the initiator and trainer of Telemachus, Odysseus' son, and helping him to find his father. And of course, the actual mentor who does the mentoring of Telemachus is actually the goddess Athena in disguise, right? So all of this comes from the inner feminine, the muse, the goddess. And so for Chiron, all the great heroes of the human world, Jason, Achilles, Asclepius, Patroclus, Heracles, all trained with Chiron. And tellingly, he does this mentoring for no good reason. All right, remember when we talked about need, want, desire? This is at the ultimate desire level. He does all of this mentoring of human heroes and the teaching of healing, this raining down of blessings on the rest of humankind for no good reason. Because let's just take a step back. Chiron is an immortal deity. He doesn't need anything, right? He doesn't need your gold. He doesn't need your honor. He does all of this goodness for no good reason. Just like Prometheus, right, who was also a Titan, and stole fire and gave it to humankind for no good reason, right? Archetypally, without fire, we have nothing, right? I mean, it's not just fire for like the campfire. It's like the stove that makes your food. It's like the fire that we use in warfare, guns, the fire that heats your home, the fire of the internal combustion engine that drives your automobile, or the fire of electricity that drives your electric car, right? And the fire of electricity that powers everything. I mean, the very medium we're conversing through right now, in terms of digital, video, internet, all of it. Right? Prometheus sparked all of that for us, and he did it for no good reason. He was moved with compassion for humankind. In fact, his giving of fire to humans, all of this bounty that we have, was illegal. Right? It's not just for no good reason. It was like against every good reason to not give it to us, because then he was punished by Zeus, chained to a rock with his liver eaten out by an eagle, right, every day. And then at night, the liver would grow back for the same torture again the next day. But Prometheus was still moved anyway, not by fear, threat, or control, but by unconditional love. Unconditional love. Love unconditionally. In other words, love for no good reason. For no good reason. You ask me why I love you, I don't even know. I can name all these things, but at the end of the day, there's really no good reason. I just love you because I love you. So that is the first wound of Chiron. That's the first one. In the second wound, Heracles, his own student, wounds him. Right? All arrows in the Greek tradition are toxic, right? They are poison tipped. The Greek word for arrow, right, is actually toxon, which, that's the root of our word toxic, which is poison, because all arrows were poison. So Heracles himself, it's really interesting. He is like a centaur himself, right? He is a man, obviously he's a hero, but he's so physically strong. I mean, he's always depicted, these Disney characters, movies, as like super strong, gorgeous beefcake of a human, but not necessarily the most philosophical tool in the shed, right? Right? He often acts before thinking, ha ha ha, right? And I'm sure in reality it was much more sort of balanced and everything. But this idea of like, if you're so much of one, you can't possibly be the other, right? It's sort of the scholar athlete is this thing that we kind of pay lip service to, but we rarely sort of really look to develop in this fully balanced way. But this Heracles principle is mentored by Chiron and comes back later to bite him, right, unwittingly. But it's very significant in this part of the story where Chiron is given this basically incurable, agonizing wound that can't even kill him because he's an immortal. So he's cursed to live this immortal life, right? It's like the eternal fires of hell, in this agonizing pain, right? Done to him by his own favorite student, Heracles, and Chiron is not angry, right? He holds space for this. He is not angry. In the exact same way, tellingly, that Prometheus is not angry. He's in agonizing pain. He's howling with like suffering, but he's not angry. He knew this would happen, and he did it anyway, out of unconditional love, for no good reason. Chiron is in agonizing pain. Now, in some traditions, as Gary mentioned, it is this pain itself that drives him to explore more healing. Right? The second wound gives him even more superpower of like, looking for a cure for his own wound. And he can't find it, but along the way he finds all these other cures for other things, right? Like he misses the mark and ends up curing something else, and then he gives that to humanity as well. And tellingly, the key source of all this healing is again from Chiron, right? From the intrinsic balance of human and body, human and animal, that is often hard for us to look straightly at and to acknowledge and accept. Said another way, it's like there's all this more detailed curing of these like more obscure diseases that Apollo, could have easily known or probably does know, but just couldn't be bothered with, right? He's not wounded. He's like hand waving, flying through the air, doing his solar golden sort of goddess thing. But Chiron gets into the weeds and like flushes out all these other aspects of healing, because he's trying to heal himself, right? Sort of this idea of the wounded healer. And said another way, just the mind and intellect and spirit, i.e. Apollo, won't give it to you in all of these sort of logistical mini details. You need the body as well, right? You need the full blend and balance of body and mind that is Chiron, that opens up the rest of the powers, that even intellect cannot open for you, intellect alone. So, I mean, at the end of the day, right, there's no healer who is not wounded. I mean, there's no human that's not wounded, first of all, right? But a healer is perhaps someone who is wounded, as all humans are. But then the next step is that a healer is a human who is wounded, who is then also accepting of, and through his or her own curiosity, becomes aware of the source of the wound. Right? So, for instance, you can have a wound. Like, oh, my father never loved me. My mother sort of always insulted me. And you can go through your whole life like a regular centaur, drinking, distracting, soothing, shielding, getting money and prestige, driving nice cars, living in a big house, and you're still like being eaten alive inside. But everything you do is to try to push it down and just not think about it. Now, that's not unreasonable, right? When we do healing and when we talk about all the different ways we soothe and shield and how we sort of re-engineer that, it's like 80% of our lives are spent soothing and shielding. It's not unreasonable. Right? I'm not going to shame like the way we normally are. I soothe and shield too, right? It's just human. But with a healer, for some random reason or for no good reason, because of luck, because of grace, because of a roll of the dice, right? A healer ends up asking the healing question, right, from the Fisher King, which we've said in the past, out of curiosity, out of self-compassion, which is a form of self-respect. Right? The person who runs away and says, I don't want to think about it, you're like, oh, they don't have a lot of self-compassion. But another way of saying that is that they don't have a lot of self-respect. Because if you have a wound and you don't want to look at it and you want to keep running at it, it's like, that's disrespectful to yourself. But when you have that self-compassion and that self-respect, or just that random curiosity, a healer is the one who asks the healing question, what is eating at me? Right? What is actually the matter here? Right? That Fisher King healing question. And then as you ask the question and move into it, you end up, long story short, becoming friends with it, becoming familiar with it, right? Becoming familiar with grief. And a healer is someone who is like soaked in grief from the get-go. So they have that, and then in addition, they become familiar with it. Right? And then they can converse with it. They're not afraid of it. They're not afraid of the fire burning them. They can like manage it like a metal worker, right? Like a blacksmith can manage fire without fear. And then they can help other people forge things out of it. It's a very Hephaestian kind of feeling there as well. Then once that happens, they know the pattern, they're familiar with grief, they're familiar with the realms down there, in the realms of soul, in the realms of the chthonic, the darkness, right? Everyone else is like love and light, everything needs to be positive. And the deeper healers are like, well, what's wrong with the darkness? Like, are you afraid of the basement in your own house? It's your basement, it's your house, right? Why would you exile a part of your house because it's dark, right? Out of self-respect, if nothing else, go claim your basement. It belongs to you, right? And you'll find, right, that all good things that rise up to the light and are positive come from the darkness, right? The gold of insight, you have to go down to find the gold, right? Wheat that grows up, amber waves of grain, all of those seeds start in the darkness. Wheat, prosperity, abundance, all come from below, right? So when someone says love and light, I almost take it as like a curse or an insult. It's like, you don't want me to have all the things that come from the darkness? Right. Or in like the Christian tradition, oh, the Prince of Darkness. It's like, well, like, can we at least talk to him? If you haven't talked to him and heard his case, like, how do you know? Right? How do you know? And that's one of the things about shame. When someone doesn't want to talk about it, you know they have a shame wound, because shame steals the tongue. Right? When you're not ashamed, you're happy to talk about it because you're not afraid of that thing being seen. Anyway, okay, so let's keep going. So once Chiron gets down there, right? Once a healer gets down there, they know the pattern, they're familiar with the darkness, they're comfortable with the darkness and the light, both. And then if they want, they can teach it to others, but they don't have to. They don't have to. I mean, even in the Buddhist tradition, they have this, it's certainly Tibetan, but I think in across Buddhist traditions, there's this concept of the Pratyeka Buddha, which is a Buddha that has become enlightened but does not teach. And the Tibetan clergy, when they say, oh, that guy's a Pratyeka Buddha, they say it like as a dire insult. They like spit on the ground, Pratyeka Buddha, right? Because they're like, if you have it and you don't teach, that's the worst. I mean, there's another sort of aspect of that where it's like, if you really are at that level, you realize there is nothing to teach. You don't have to teach. And actually not teaching you is kind of that flower holding up with a smile. Like those who have eyes to see will get that when I don't teach enlightenment, it's like telling you something about enlightenment, right? So there's no fear, thought, and control. You can teach or not teach. Chiron didn't have to teach, but he taught anyway for no good reason. Right? Out of desire, out of delight, out of unconditional love. So with Chiron, he to me is this archetype of the ultimate healer. He is not just single wounded, he is double wounded. And he is also, the second wound comes from his own mentoring action. If he hadn't taught, he wouldn't have been wounded. Right? If Prometheus had not done his act of fire theft, compassion, he wouldn't have been tied to a rock and have an eagle eating at his liver forever. Right? Just like Prometheus, Chiron suffers for his act of unconditional love, and he's fine with it. Right? He knew it would happen. He did it anyway, just like Prometheus. Right? And the clue that he kind of knew, or he understood that this was the larger pattern, was that when Heracles shoots him, he isn't angry at Heracles. He doesn't curse Heracles. He doesn't say, get out of my sight. He's like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's all right. So it's like this feeling of like, he knew all this would happen and he is actually okay with it, just like Prometheus. And, you kind of, it's so hard, I was telling Gowrie, it's like, what is this like? It's like, what we used to say in Queens. It's like, hey, that's just the kind of guy I am. I'm a good guy. Right. But also at a deeper level, there is this deep sense of beauty and sacredness in the pattern here. This feeling of knowing this thing is going to cause you pain and suffering, like the ultimate pain and suffering, and you do it anyway for no good reason. Right? It's almost like with certain movies, like deep love stories. And the movies I'm thinking of that came to mind here are like that movie from a while ago with Jim Carrey, like The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Or even more recently, La La Land, right? That sort of Hollywood musical also had this undercurrent to the story where there's this theme of a question, right? Where it's like you had this unbelievable love affair, right? And this happens in both these movies as well. You had this unbelievable, incredible love affair, and in the end, it crushed you. It broke your heart. It destroyed you. It incinerated and destroyed you. And then after that, the question, if we went back in time and you knew in the beginning that it would all turn out like this in the end, that you would be crushed, would you still have done it anyway? Would you still have had the love affair anyway? And to me, and in the greatest love stories, the answer is yes. Not just yes, hell yes. Right? In other words, I take the pleasure together with the pain, all of it without condition. Right? My time with her was worth it, all of it. Right? Unconditional love. I mean, of the love affair, but I mean, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you have that unconditional love for the love affair, then it's also saying you have unconditional love for the living of life itself. Right? I'm going to die. I'm going to experience ups and downs in my life, and that's fine. I take all of it. I love all of it. Right? And this unconditionality is precisely what, like categorically, by definition, flips you into the sacred instantly. Because there is no fear, threat, and control. Oh, this love affair I'm getting to will end and I will be crushed. Fear, threat? No fear, no control, right? It's okay. I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm not going to run away from a love affair or from life because of fear of pain or threat or loss. I mean, I'm already here as a human. I've kind of already signed up for that, right? So, I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound, you may as well just like, just inhale everything at the buffet of life. Right? I take it all without fear, without threat, without condition/control. And then when you do that, you get, in my opinion, my humble opinion, what you actually came here for, which was the even deeper nourishment of the sacred, right? Which is, of course, beyond the desire for pleasure and beyond the fear of pain. So that is also why, in my opinion, there's this deep connection mythopoetically between why Chiron is the one who takes the place of Prometheus. Right? These two are on parallel tracks, and then they flip. Right? One braids into the other, and this is exactly the reason why. Because it's like Chiron and Prometheus. What do they share in common? And the connection that they share, to me, is this pattern of unconditional love for humankind and suffering on behalf of humankind, knowing they're going to suffer and being okay with it. Right? Prometheus, like Chiron, was a Titan also. Hecate is a Titan. Right? All of these earlier generation deities have this kind of very instinctive, unconditional, visceral love for humankind, almost like grandparents, right? Because it's like they're the grandparents, the Olympians are the next level, and then we're like the kind of, sort of children of the Olympians. You have this inexplicable compassion for your grandkids, right? And your own kids are like, don't trust him. Don't trust grandpa. He was a monster when he was my dad. That's not, what's the old joke? That's not a nice person. That's just some guy trying to get into heaven. Because he's older and he's trying to win the favor of his grandkids. So Chiron then is double wounded, which kind of makes him the grand healer. And then not that you need any more clues, but in the end, right, the final stamp of like, yeah, this is certified, is that even Zeus himself, who is not even his father, he's like his half-brother, right, because they're both sons of Kronos. Even Zeus concedes this and recognizes him and gives him immortal glory and honor, right? He places him in the constellations. Okay, so that's about what I have for my notes. Gary, do you have anything to add? What would you like to say?
Hi, Artie. Yeah.
Hello. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, this of unconditional love kind of brought back to me, especially in very similar context as Chiron here is in terms of mentoring others and taking young boys under their wing and under his wing and then training them, raising them. I was reminded of Harry Potter and, funnily, there are centaurs in Harry Potter. And I think the centaur Firenze comes very close to Chiron in terms of how wise he is and all of that. But I don't think Firenze actually embodies the kind of compassion and love that Chiron shows. It's actually Hagrid that I'm reminded of in the way that, who he takes Harry under his wing. And before Harry, it's all those creatures, monsters as they're called, these ferocious beasts that humans fear.
Right.
And humans exile, that Hagrid has a special compassion for. Like anyone who's like this outsider, who's not allowed to be integrated.
I mean, Hagrid himself is like a big furry bear, right? He's himself is like half man, half beast, practically.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a caretaker for all the beasts, and he's exiled to the edge of Hogwarts property.
Yeah, and on top of it, just like Chiron, he's not like any of the other giants, where most giants, live on the mountains. They don't mingle with humans. They're these fierce, savage beasts that everyone's afraid of. But Hagrid is this very genial, very affectionate and gentle kind of giant who everyone loves. So it's this amazing kind of the spirit of kind of Hagrid, which kind of so much resonates with Chiron. So I'm kind of reminded of that. Yeah, and like you pointed out with Chiron, it was his own wounding that gave him that. I mean, you could say that love for no good reason, but love has a source which comes from the wounding. I mean, he knows what it is to be abandoned, exiled. And from there, the love for, the love and kind of responsibility of giving care and attention to other creatures, that's where it comes in. And in Hagrid's case, I think it was the same thing. He knows what it was to be wrongly accused and then exiled. So then he has that softness towards every creature who is misunderstood and then exiled. Right. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful kind of theme that keeps coming up. And I'm sure there are like hundreds of stories where this theme comes up over and over again. Because I think it's a very human thing to feel and experience and to live by.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. What else?
The other thing, I think, in honor of Chiron, something that I remembered in terms of what Achilles said when Chiron was dying. Apparently, Achilles was with him. One of the texts mentions that Achilles was by his side when Chiron was dying. And I'm just paraphrasing. This is not literally what it says, but it says Achilles mourned for him and grieved for him the way he would have honored his father. And Achilles is weeping, and he holds Chiron's hand. He kisses him, and calls him father. He actually calls him father and says, "Please don't die. Please live." This is when Chiron's decided to trade in his life, right, for Prometheus. So he's decided to die. So Achilles, can't hold this grief back, and he begs him and pleads him and says, "Please don't die." And the way he grieves for him is the way he would have grieved for his father, is what it says. So the theme that just came to be so strongly, and I think we've done this when we discussed male initiation, is the role of the male elder in the community, right? He does. I mean, he's not the father. It's not the father who actually initiates the young boy. It's usually one of the elders in the community. It's either an uncle or other, chief or elder of the tribe.
That's right.
That kind of figure, and he stands in like a father figure and initiates the boy. So it's the bond that a young man shares with his mentor is the way he would. I mean, it's probably sometimes even more powerful than the bond he shares with his own father, right?
Absolutely.
So that, I think, in that episode, it comes through so strongly about the role Chiron played in all of his mentees' lives. And then it was literally like he was, I mean, and interestingly, Chiron himself had only daughters, right? His own biological daughters. Some of those daughters even, I think, kind of raised Asclepius when he was a baby. So that kind of so biologically, he only has daughters, but there were all these boys that he mentored who he was like a father figure. So that was, I think, is an amazing representation of what mentoring really is like.
I love that. Huh. It's interesting. It's like from his body comes the feminine, and from his hands, right, come the masculine.
Right.
Mentoring, because Chiro means hands.
Means hands. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anything else?
So I think that was it. But do you have any questions or reflection on Chiron?
No, I think that's enough. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking future we could do definitely a session on Asclepius and maybe a couple of the other archetypes, mythic patterns, mythic figures we've mentioned here. But yeah, I think that could be interesting.
I think the way we're going, there's a whole lot of Greek mythology series that's kind of building over time. So
yeah, hopefully people won't get too sick of it, but yeah. And that's okay.
So do you have an exercise that you would like to give?
Okay, let's do the exercise. So for this week, we've come up with an exercise to suggest. And as usual, I'll just remind that the fourth principle of proceeding sacred space: no expectation of participation. So you do this exercise, only if you want. Everything you do, only if you want. And the way to do this exercise would be between now and the next session, when you have maybe 10. Well, for this one, maybe a little longer, 10 or 15 minutes alone. In the car, sort of on your way to doing something, alone at home, if you have alone space at home. Pull out some pen and paper, think about these questions, and then just, barf it out on the paper. Just let yourself write. Like, give up writing control. Give up control of your writing hand, and just try to let yourself write without any self-editing or self-assessment or self-censorship. And then dump it all out. If, like a centaur, it's too much for you to face, you can, you can just not read it and throw it away. I don't generally recommend that because it will come back in a different form. I prefer the paper form. It's less disruptive. And then read what you've written, and then sort of sit and reflect in sacred space if you can get yourself into that space, and then see what comes. Only if you want. Only if you want. So I guess the exercise this week is a little bit advanced. And the reason I say that is that, to be fair, everything I teach, right, all these programs, the thousands of videos, all the people around the world, everything I teach basically boils down to this one question I'm going to give you, right? So if you're like, in 10 minutes, I can't really sort of get there, don't worry, right? And it's not the kind of question I would just put to you, because it's a little bit almost too much. But in the course of doing this, talking about Chiron, the grandfather of healers, the grandparent of healers, I feel called to basically jump ahead and just give you this question. I mean, in many ways, it is the central question of everything I help you with at Preside. So I'll give this to you to work on, perhaps not just for the week, but over the course of a lifetime, if you will. And at least you'll just have the DNA seed of the question, then it'll take you however it takes you. So the question is the ultimate, for me, the ultimate Chiron question at the grandfather level, which is, what is the deepest wound of your life? What is the deepest wound of your life? And then, how does your delight, the thing you do for no good reason, spring from that wound? That's it. What is the deepest wound of your life? And then how does your delight, the thing you do for no good reason, out of pure joy, desire, and bliss, spring from that wound? Now, your first reaction, especially if the deepest wound of your life is traumatic, horrific, horrible, right? Your first reaction may be, well, what the hell are you doing, right? This is absurd. This is absurd. And I hold space for that reaction, right? This is a question that we would not normally even begin to ask until we're like several levels in, right? And as I have said in the past, like this key Fisher King healing question, what is the matter here, right? What is even eating at me? What ails me, right? That is the key healing question that initiates, that helps you cross the threshold and get onto this path. But as you travel this path and walk it, the deeper question you end up answering when you go deep enough, layer after layer, right? At some point you hit your deepest wound, and then you feel this mysterious connection to your bliss. Right, as you go through your wound and then start to find your bliss, now that you've done a bunch of healing and you feel clear now, instead of soothing and shielding all the time, your inner forces are like, okay, chief, where to next? And you're like, well, I don't know, right? I'm not drinking anymore, not smoking anymore. I'm not like doing all these things to run away from my wound. My wound is sitting next to me, as we Americans say, riding shotgun with me, right? Guiding me, protecting me, my companion now, right? Grief is my companion in a way. So if I'm not spending all my life like running away, going after prestige, running away from this wound, and this wound is sitting next to me now, what the hell do I do? That was like 80% of my life. And now it's like all of that is cleared. I have like all this excess budget, right? As the Jungians would say, disposable libido. And I don't know if I forgot, it was Freudian or Jungian. Disposable libido, right? Extra libido that you don't need to whip with fear, threat, or control. You just have it now for no good reason, because you're not hustling and running under the regime of fear, threat, and control. What do? Then you start moving toward your bliss. And when you get into the flow of your bliss and you're flowing, every now and then you'll look back and you'll be like, wait a minute, there's something about my bliss that looks familiar. And you're like, holy cow, my bliss is like almost this mirror image of my deepest wound. But sometimes halfway through, you realize, if I turn away from my wound, I turn away from my bliss as well. Right? It's like that Chiron Prometheus question of those deep love stories that I talked about. Right? I mean, if you knew in the beginning, right, your bliss would come to you, but it would be at the cost of this wound, right, would you still do it? The deepest answer to that love story question is like, not just yeah, but hell yeah. I mean, the very fact that you exist on this earth right now and we're like talking over, sort of bandwidth, internet. I mean, you can curse and swear and say, no, I never signed up for this. I'm just an innocent victim. And yet here we are, right? If you're so innocent, what the hell are you doing here? Why did you sign up for this ride? And maybe that's too much truth for you and you need to banish me as you would banish Chiron. But that's okay. We always come back. If not in this form, then in another. Then in another. So you realize if I turn away from my wound, I turn away from my bliss. So even there, it's like, you turn into your wound. But at the end of the day, that's not why you do it. That's not why you do it. Right? You take them both equally. You take them both equally without condition. That's unconditional love. Right? They are connected, two sides of the same coin. And then as you go deeper into your wound, your bliss gets deeper as well. And as you go deeper into your bliss, I mean, I can attest to this, truckloads. As I've gone deeper into my bliss, I've gone deeper into my wounds as well. Right? And it has been terrifying and also wondrous. I mean, even Joseph Campbell, right? Sort of Chironic, sort of Asclepian figure himself, would always say, and he was quoting someone else, and I've never been able to find the original quote, but he would always say, from your deepest wound will come your greatest gift to the world. From your deepest wound will come your greatest gift to the world. That's the exercise. What is the deepest wound of your life? And then how does your delight, the thing you do for no good reason, spring, flow, surge from that wound? All of this then inspired by our discussion and offering of honor to Chiron. And we give him honor. We give him our thanks and our love without condition. Our unconditional love here in this temple gathering of the sacred. Okay, so I think that's about it for this session. So now I'll go ahead and I'll close the session. Our next session is next Sunday, the 53rd session of Live Sacred Space. It's free. It's open to the public. Please feel free to invite others. Only if you want. I'll drop a link in Facebook chat and Crowdcast chat as well. Okay. And then I'll go ahead now and close the session. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you.